All right, hello everybody. Today I have a short video for you. It's something that I found in the last couple of days. As if you've watched a bunch of my videos, you probably know that I refer to Nero Wolfe and Rex Stout a lot. It's one of my favorite book series, possibly my favorite book series of all times. I mean, it's large enough that it outstrips almost any other book series. But another thing that is one of my favorite things in the world is the A&E television series that was released in 2000 and 2001. So this was a really good television series. And I mean that in not just hey, if you're a fan of Wolfe, this is a good adaptation. It is that too, but they actually did a lot of really good work with faithful recreation of things like period era cars, fashion, style in general. Several of the stories that they adapted are take place a couple of decades apart, and you can actually see the differences in how the characters are dressed and what kinds of cars appear in the short interstitial scenes. Very notable of this particular series was its use of original novel and novella plots with very little tinkering. Say, a lot of the adaptations of Nero Wolfe have tinkered with things a lot. They take Stout's dialogue and they fiddle with it, and it's usually the result is usually not better than what Stout did. And so this particular series did a very good job of just kind of adapting the books in a very faithful and detailed way. Maury Chaykin as Nero Wolfe does an outstanding job, and Timothy Hutton as Archie Goodwin also does a really, really good job, at least in my opinion. You can, when you're reading the books, and it's not just the TV show, right? I'll show a couple of pictures of my shelf back there where I have a bunch of, first-ish editions of Wolfe books, mostly that were given to me by my dad as, like, Christmas gifts. But I also have, almost the entire collection of these paperbacks that were made by Bantam Crime Line back in the day. And, that way I can read them, over and over again without damaging the older books. And I can always envision, whenever I'm reading the books, I can almost always envision Chaykin and Hutton doing what's in the books, even if I didn't actually see it. A lot of different people have tried to adapt the Wolfe books to different media. There was a radio show that appeared, when was that? In the 1940s, 1950s? I forget exactly when it appeared, but you can find it actually for free on the old radio apps or websites and stuff like that. They had very simple plots, much more kind of like a real quick crime story kind of plots for those. And generally, they did not go off of the books at all. They just carried over the characters of Wolfe and Archie. There was a 1980s television show, which I haven't seen any episodes of, but I've heard good things about it. So maybe I'll have to look that up one day. But I was poking around on Archive, and what I found is that there was actually a failed attempt, but an attempt to make a Nero Wolfe television show back in 1959. And the two main actors were Kurt Kasznar as Wolfe. Kasznar was a prolific film and television actor from the 1940s, I think, possibly even earlier than that, all the way up to when he died. He died in, I think, 79, and he acted all the way up until 1978. I'm pretty sure I have those dates right, but I didn't write them down. And then the real weird thing, and he's a good, well-known actor. I would say that he wasn't given particularly good direction as to how to play Wolfe in this, because he, as I'll get to in a minute, he plays Wolfe in a very kind of undignified comedic way, which is not so accurate to the books. But the real thing that caught my eye when I saw this listing was William Shatner as Archie Goodwin. And this is 1959. This is pre-Star Trek. So this is a very young William Shatner. I didn't bother to look up his filmography, but, this is, the big thing that Shatner is known for is Star Trek. And this is before even that. Apparently there were a few episodes of this show filmed, but all that we have as far as, the listing that I found was an episode of the pilot, which was colorized. And it's basically about a scientist who dies unexpectedly when a rocket is launched toward the moon. 1959. So this is when mankind is still trying to figure out how to even hit the moon with a rocket, let alone orbit around it and so on and so forth. One point I forgot to mention is that Kurt Kasznar played Smirnov in the Casino Royale James Bond movie, the old one, not the new one. So, what can I say about this show? It's 26 minutes, it's a very short mystery. In fact, there's not a whole lot of mystery in there. It's very simplified, like the radio shows often were. There are a few details that are maintained, but many are adjusted. For instance, at the very beginning of the episode, Archie walks in with a newspaper and hands Wolfe his food on his tray. Wolfe has a cold, and Archie drinks some milk, and Wolfe eats his breakfast while Archie reads him the newspaper, which is Archie drinking milk is good. Nero Wolfe eating breakfast, in his bed is good, but Archie Goodwin reading the newspaper to Nero Wolfe is a bit out of character, though not entirely outside the bounds of sense. But the way that Kasznar as Wolfe eats his breakfast is kind of a little disgusting, actually. he just goes at that breakfast. He's got an omelet and like a thing of toast or something like that. He's just digging into it in a way that is a little bit less dignified than what Wolfe usually, how Wolfe was usually portrayed in the books. In fact, this story is a little bit more. People do this a lot. They try to take Wolfe and they try to make it a little bit more comedic without realizing that the point of the comedy in the Rex Stout Wolfe books was that it was a punctuation mark as opposed to something that was consistently throughout the books. And often the humor was effective because of Archie's spin on a thing and not because of the thing itself. So a little bit of a failure there. Now, as far as I know, this is not actually an adaptation of a genuine Wolfe story, but it appears to be some original story about this scientist. I would say it's not too badly written for a Wolfe story, despite being very, very truncated and very, very simplified. It's not terrible. Like it's not. It doesn't completely butcher any of the characters. Archie reads the paper to Wolfe, and Wolfe gives Archie instructions to tell the papers that the scientist was murdered. And this is Wolfe making a bold statement to a newspaper, which is in character, but right, because Wolfe would often make bold statements to newspapers, but it would be after he has already spent some time doing something, right? In this one, Wolfe basically just looks at the newspaper and says, "Put this in the newspaper," and it's like, ooh, that's a little bit jumping the gun, honestly. So next up in the story, Archie does some legwork, which is very in character. He goes to an office, he meets a secretary, he flirts with the secretary a little bit shamelessly, a little more shamelessly than I think Archie Goodwin typically would. Not completely out of character, but a little bit exaggerated, I would say. Archie gets kicked out of the office because the guy doesn't want to talk to him, which is also something that often happens in the Nero Wolfe books. Then Wolfe does something that is very Nero Wolfe. He uses a ruse to get everyone assembled in his office rather than having to meet them one at a time, which is definitely a very Wolfe thing to do. On the downside, when Wolfe is talking to these people, he's very expressive. And if you've read the books, enough of them, you know that Wolfe is typically very, very sedate when he's sitting and talking to people. He doesn't like to move around a lot. Often Archie will describe his nod as barely an eighth of an inch, right? Which I can't even, that would be that, right? One thing worth mentioning is that there is an actor appearing in this pilot named George Voskovec. And he, you might know from the original 12 Angry Men movie with Henry Fonda, I believe. And he appears as one of the scientists who's a suspect and does a good job. One of the interesting things about this episode, this pilot, is that there's a very, I would say, unique or clever method for murder done in this. I won't completely spoil it, but the idea is that a scientist has altered a thing to make it so that something will kill this scientist without him realizing that's what he's done. I'll put a link in the description so you can go watch the episode yourself if you feel like it, basically. Another weird thing about this episode is that Wolfe has his hands on some of this video footage that just should not exist, and he plays it for his audience, which is, I think, a little strange and hard to justify. One other fun thing about this, or one other characteristic thing about this show, is that right at the very end, Wolfe finishes his job, and he walks out of the room. And as he walks out of the room, he demands, to be left alone in his room to deal with his cold, and also to have some cold beer. So there, at the very end, we get another little taste of Wolfe character that is proper. I would say overall, this show was a fun watch for a Wolfe fan. If you don't care about Nero Wolfe, you probably won't care about this. If you're a Shatner fan, you might want to check it out just to see a bit of, almost lost Shatner media. The story is interesting and decent, but not amazingly deep or tricky like some of the Nero Wolfe stories can actually be. Subtle, I guess, is a better word for Nero Wolfe, because they're not usually very tricky, but there's some subtle point that Wolfe picks up on that nobody else does that helps him get ahead, basically. But yeah, that is what I've got for today. I'll also include a link to, you can watch the whole thing of this over on Archive, and it is one of the most well-made television shows of all time, I think. And it does a very good job of adapting the stout Wolfe stories in a way that is accurate to how the books were, basically. So they're a very good TV show that does things that you wouldn't really think a lot of TV shows would be able to do. Anyway, that's what I got for today. Hope you enjoy. Hope you will maybe check out some good television. Yeah, have a good one, and I'll see you next time.